Hey, I'm Gina. Welcome to the Oh, There's More podcast, a space to get real and go deep. No more just checking the boxes and going through the motions. It's time to live out the beautiful life that God has written for you. On today's episode, we'll talk about disappointment and dreaming with God. Oh, this is a fun one today. Disappointment. I feel like there's probably not a single person in the world who hasn't experienced disappointment to one degree or another. And I'm sure there are some of us that have experienced more disappointment than others. After walking through divorce number 2, you could definitely say there was a lot of disappointment in my life. Being a child from a divorced family, I had said my whole growing up years that I would never get divorced. And then here I am, divorce number 2 down, 3 kids who have had to deal with the aftermath of it. I don't even know if disappointment is quite the right word, in all honesty. But I had made so many not great choices up until that point in my life that led to so much disappointment that I felt like, you know what? I'm really not good at making decisions. I'm probably not the best person to run my life, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to give it all to God. That's a really common phrase we hear anyways, right? Just give it to God. And so I did that with my life. I got to a point where there wasn't a whole lot that I would choose because I was going to choose wrong in my mind and then it was going to lead to disappointment. So I'll just leave it all up to God. God can tell me. And there were a lot of places for a long time that I felt like God did. He was such a good father and he led me in the right direction, was very clear what I was supposed to do, where I was supposed to go, all of those things. And then it was like I got to a point where he said, okay, you're not a toddler anymore. You're like a 12-year-old and now we're gonna let you start to have some autonomy. We're gonna let you start to like decide. There is no like red or green light. It's more of a like, well, which one do you think you want? Which one do you want to choose? And I can tell you that was a really scary place for me to be. I didn't want to make choices again. I didn't want to decide things because I, again, thought that I was just going to land right back in that place of disappointment over and over again, and nobody wants to live there. And so I realized I was in this place where I was afraid to even dream with God. I was afraid to envision the possibilities. I was afraid to think of any wonderful things that could happen because if I did that in my mind, we were going to land right back in disappointment. Back in 2022, God had asked me to sell my house and move me and my 2 younger sons into an RV. I'd always wanted to live in a tiny house. I'm one of those, I don't know, you could call me crazy people or whatever. But the state that I live in, it seemed like there was all of these restrictions on getting a tiny house and then land and all of that. It just seemed like it wasn't something that was really going to be able to work out. And wanting to own my own land and my own tiny house, but having a VA loan, there were just all these details. It was like these pieces to the puzzle just don't fit together. So when the Lord said, sell your house and move you and your boys into an RV, I'm going to take you guys on an adventure, I was like, okay, it's kind of like a tiny house, right? I mean, it's built a little different, but square feet wise, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. And so that's what we did. And about 6 to 8 weeks after we got the RV, I'm not going to go into all the details because there is a lot. It has been quite the adventure. It was revealed where we were going and why. God has called me to a specific group of women who, like me, have looked to men to fill that gaping hole in their hearts. And there was a pregnancy resource center opening up in this city that was in the area of where I had felt we were going, and just everything lined up perfectly. And so a week later, we were off. We moved. And here I am 18 months later, and I will just tell you that my life today does not at all look like I thought it would look when we moved here. I am no longer a part of laying the foundations for that women's clinic. That assignment from the Lord for me finished a couple of months ago. The RV is no longer something that we're staying in. Like, I could go down a really long list of all the things that are not like I thought they would be. And in fact, if the Lord would have told me 2+ years ago that this is where we would be, I don't know as I would have obeyed him and sold my house. And so I landed in this place of so much disappointment that I was like, I dreamed so big with you, Lord, on this one, and look where it got me. It got me to this place of what felt like despair, in all honesty. It felt almost unsafe to dream. And so I was immobilized by this inability to think about my future and think about what was next with God. The disappointment had set in so deep in my life. I couldn't even set realistic goals. And just like we let our kids begin to have that autonomy, to let them make more choices, to let them kind of have more of a say in their lives as they get older and they learn more and they have more responsibility because they become more mature. That same thing happens in our relationship with the Lord. We begin to mature, and because we walk in that discernment of being able to hear God speak to us, in being able to let God lead us and direct us in our lives, because we're seeking him for what we're going to do. We're seeking him for his will. We're praying. We're asking him. He guides us and directs us, but also gives us that ability to dream with him, that ability to make those decisions and be empowered in that place of maturity that we have gotten to. And something that I heard someone say was, instead of always trying to avoid disappointment, what if we made friends with it? I know that might sound a little bit weird at first, but here's the thing. There's no way that we can avoid disappointment in our lives. It's going to happen. It just is inevitable. We are living in a fallen world and nobody is perfect, and therefore people, situations, circumstances are just going to disappoint us. So what if we weren't afraid of disappointment and instead we were like, wow, you know what? I'm really disappointed right now. I'm just going to sit here for a minute and accept the fact that that was disappointing and that is normal and natural for me to feel that way. And that I don't have to live in this place of disappointment, but I can absolutely acknowledge that is what is going on here. And then have the ability to dream again. I was working through some vision casting for my business, and shout out to my awesome coach, Heather Shriver Burns, Seek First CEO. She is amazing. But as we were going through this coaching session and just kind of dreaming and vision casting for my business, I felt the Lord tell me, it's okay to dream. I want you to dream. And it's also totally okay if it doesn't turn out exactly the way that you dreamed it. That hit me so hard. Like, wow, there isn't anything that I've done wrong if I dream and it doesn't come to pass exactly how I dreamed it up. Oftentimes it doesn't, and that's okay. That doesn't mean we have to be afraid of dreaming because we're going to be disappointed in the outcome. At this point where I sit, I could probably give you a pretty long list of ways that this whole season has been a disappointment, and an equally long list of all the ways that this season has been exactly what I needed. Exactly what I needed. Not one bit of it is what I would have asked for, in all honesty, not one bit of it, but it has been every single thing that I needed, and I know that's because God is preparing me for the next thing. I dreamed. It turned out totally different. And yet, here I sit so grateful and so thankful for everything that God has done in this really hard season that was filled with disappointment. So what if we can make friends with disappointment? What if we can sit on the steps with disappointment next to us and say, yep, that's some disappointment right there. And then keep moving. Acknowledge it. Process through it. And then keep walking forward and continuing to dream with God. Continuing to have Him lead us into wild and crazy places. If I could have told you guys the full story of the whole house and the RV thing, like, I'll just throw this in there. The night that the last night in our house, I had probably the worst anxiety attack that I have ever had in my entire life. I've gone through periods in my life of anxiety. Most of it was decades ago. And I'm telling you, this was so intense. Like, it was such a huge thing for me to step out in the way that I did, for me to say yes to God, knowing full well that house, the only reason we had it was because He blessed us. And if I were to give up that house, I knew that we would not be getting another one unless the Lord were to do a literal miracle, like even more so than He did with that house. I knew that I was giving up my home with no foresight of another home. I dreamed big. Probably bigger than I ever had in that season of writing my book, selling my house, moving to an area where I only knew of one person. I didn't even actually know her. She had 4 kids. I only knew of one. Now we're living in her house, but that's a story for another day. The level of dreaming. I wouldn't be where I'm at today if I hadn't dreamed and walked through that incredible disappointment. So while it's not something that's fun to feel, it is something that I want us to learn to not be afraid of. Not everything will work out the way that we envision it or even want it to. But I don't want that to stop us from continuing to dream, pray, ask, hope, and believe. Believe in the goodness of God and that He's got good plans for you. One of my favorite phrases is, God writes the most beautiful stories. It chokes me up every time I say it because He really, really, truly does. He is such a good Father. He knows exactly what we need and what way we need it. I needed to know what it looked like to be loved, accepted, and brought into family the way that I have been in this house. And I didn't even know it. God writes the most beautiful stories. And He's writing a beautiful story for you, friend. So don't let disappointment stop you, and don't stop dreaming. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, and share it with your people. You can go to my website, ginapeak.com, to find extra resources and info. Until next time,